Cygames is a well-renowned Japanese video game development and publishing company. It was founded in 2011, and since then, it has produced such titles as Rage of Bahamut and its successful anime adaptation, Shadowverse, Princess Connect Redive, Dragalia Lost, Uma Musume Pretty Derby, but the most successful IP in the Cygames repertoire has always been Granblue Fantasy. It has, at the moment of writing, more than 36 million players. It was also adapted into an anime, 2 seasons of Granblue Fantasy the animation, and a short and cute Minari of Friends that features some characters from Rage of Bahamut that were reintroduced in GBF. But most importantly, in 2020, it got a video game spin-off, Granblue Fantasy Versus. The game wasn't a raging success as the developers at Arc System Works and publishers Cygames would have hoped, but it still sold decently well and spawned a couple of DLC waves. With the whole fighting game world slowly moving towards its rollback future, its delay-based netcode would hinder any further growth as gamers all around the world are becoming less and less accepting of the subpar connections. And thus, Granblue Fantasy Versus Rising was born. Well, that's not the only reason, but rollback netcode and crossplay support are nevertheless the biggest draw for us, the players. The main goal of the new game is to also fix all the major points of frustration that players voiced, mainly that Granblue Fantasy Versus felt incomplete. It had all the right foundations, but never capitalized on them. Rising fixed a lot of the major problems, but some stuff still felt like side grades. Granblue Fantasy Versus followed an original, standalone story that had the players solve the issue of increasingly chaotic and inexplicable changes that affected the characters and locations within the setting. It was presented in a side-scrolling beat-em-up format where you could use your entire fighting game arsenal and moves coupled with several support abilities. In addition to this, most of the time, you can have an AI or a co-op buddy play alongside you. Don't worry if you haven't played the original GBVS, as Rising contains all the chapters from the prequel while reimagining the scenes and how they're presented. The sequel, however, does away with the weapon system. You can no longer loot, equip, merge, or recycle weapons for the characters in the story mode. It's noticeably more streamlined in general, being there to simply tell you a story rather than give you an alternate, fully fleshed out mode to sink your teeth into. Granblue Fantasy Versus Rising adds 2 more parts to the plot, and if you had played the story mode in the original, you have the option to skip directly to the content of the sequel. We're quite limited in what we can tell or show you, so we'll keep it all vague. It follows the same general flow and feel, with battle segments interspersed throughout the storytelling ones. The plot is a direct continuation of the original, so it's not advised to skip if you haven't experienced it yet. We get some nice reveals and explanations about some of the more peculiar character backstories, fight with and against some characters that could show up as playable in the future, and reach a nice conclusion that, nevertheless, leaves the door open for more stories, because the Skydom is vast and the Captain and the Grand Cypher crew can always find adventures. It's hard to say if we prefer the more streamlined approach to the story mode. On the one hand, some of the NPC battles are sometimes mind-numbingly dull, and the fact that we no longer need to add to this by equipment management is a saving grace. On the other hand, it is indeed no longer an RPG mode like it was in the original, and rather just a relatively engaging and interactive story mode. Nevertheless, we'd still recommend you play it, especially if you're a newer player, as the beat-em-up mode teaches you some of the basics of GBVS combat. If you squint hard enough, you will notice that Rising received updates to its visual presentation. It's not completely strikingly different from the previous title, it's more of an update, story of the day so far, huh? That's aimed to make it more authentic, more in line with the original mobile Granblue Fantasy. They changed the character shading a bit, and the model outline is much milder in Rising as well. Several models were also changed to make them more authentic. Some of the changes leave the impression of the visuals being more washed out, but it's not the case. The visuals are crisp and fluid, looking incredible on a PS5 and a 4K TV combo. Changes were made not only to the characters, but to the UI as well. Now it looks like it was lifted directly from the original gacha. Even the post-battle reward screen looks similar to those you get when you finish one of the quests or raids on mobile. Going this hard for the sake of authenticity isn't random. Granblue Fantasy Versus was criticized somewhat for the changes that supposedly went just a bit too far. Now you have a game that actually feels like it's an extension of the game it was spun off from. Several important and game-defining changes were made to the gameplay. Systems were updated and reworked, with the end goal being to make Rising an engaging, easy to pick up, but rewarding and hard to master fighter. The biggest and most controversial changes were made to simplified controls. The original Versus also had them, but the player was punished by increased skill cooldowns. This was removed, and instead, performing skills with technical inputs provides a small 10% damage increase. They, however, need to be performed raw, as weaving them into your combos will have the same damage output. It's unclear if the developers intend to further balance the differences between the simplified and technical inputs, or if they feel like the current status quo is good enough. After all, the aforementioned change was implemented after the feedback from the first beta. Some good quality of life changes were made to the auto combo system, now called triple attack. It gained a finisher that can be cancelled into a skill. You can perform dash attacks now as well, with different qualities depending on the button you press. A much more interesting system, and the one we're worried about, is the one tied into bravery points. You get 3 of them at the beginning of the match, and there are several ways to spin, lose, and earn them. The most common way to spend them is by activating either a Raging Strike or a Brave Counter. Raging Strike is used to crush your opponent's guard with an unblockable, while Brave Counter is performed while blocking or to escape the guard crush state. Raging Strike can also be followed up by Raging Chain, but it will cost you 25% of your SBA gauge. Still, it's worth it, as you can extend combos with it, as well as find launches seemingly out of nowhere. This is a bit worrisome, as getting corner trapped by anyone who knows what they're doing feels incredibly oppressive, considering the amount of punishment they can inflict if they even have 1 brave point available. Skybound and Super Skybound arts also play into this system, as you gain 1 point for landing it and lose 1 or 2 if you get hit by the respective super. You could look all this up and train in using it in the trial-style tutorial system within the training mode. There, you'll be able to master not only how to use your own character, but also how to play the game in general, even if you're a total beginner. It teaches you how to attack, block, hit confirm, grab, do a combo, all the way up to the specific situations of how to avoid Matera's projectile or withstand Seox's pressure. Most of the game's cast is retained from Versus and its waves of DLCs, but Rising has its own newcomers as well. Anila, Siegfried, Nier, and Grimnir, with Lucilius being confirmed for the first DLC pack. Anila is relatively straightforward to use, her sheet providing her with most of her offensive and mobility tools, as well as allowing her to contest the neutral. Siegfried also looks simple, but deceptively so. His power-up move cost him some health, and his install super takes as much as half of his HP bar, giving some of his attacks regen on hit instead. This does not make him one of the hardest hitting characters on the roster, however, and he's not too complex execution-wise. Who are complex, however, are Nier and Grimnir. Nier is a typical puppet master, but she doesn't require constant control of her summon, and neither does it have a negative edge to its attacks. Still, she's a handful to control and could be defenseless without her tokens. Grimnir is a different beast. He's strong without any concessions, but to unleash his full potential, you need to learn how to utilize the dashes he gets from placing marks on the screen. These 4 characters bring further variety to the roster, which gets expanded to 28 fighters. The game's mechanics tend to force you into a particular playstyle with how the normals and systems interact, but most of the cast feels distinct enough not to make you think you're playing the same character over and over again. The biggest and most important change Rising made was the rollback implementation, along with some much needed quality of life improvements for lobbies, friends list, and general online experience. The new lobby allows you to select your server and send your chibified version to interact with other players, play minigames, or simply go into versus battles. As a side note, do you find it weird that so many games have decided to take their lobby or battle hub system and chibify it, while Street Fighter is the only one that really remains with realistic proportions? Weird. You also have your standard selection of casual or ranked matches, friend rooms, and Granblue's leagues, a game mode we weren't able to experience due to endless queue times. A great change is that your rank is now tied to the character, but so is the character progression. And while it won't take you long to max out your main and online modes and unlock all the colors, banners, and such, you get just a fraction of the experience by playing offline versus AI. It could be frustrating for some that purely cosmetic items essentially require you to play online. And speaking of online, our experience playing versus others was unexpectedly rocky, but maybe we were spoiled by the connection Street Fighter 6 offered. After Rising's early access launched in Japan, we tried playing against some of the Japanese players, but the over 400 ping and 7 rollback frames proved to be challenging, prohibitively so. When the access got rolled out to Europe, we managed to test the connection to people closer to us, and while generally the experience was decent, there were still some outliers that had massive instabilities and even drops. When it does work, however, no issues are to be seen. It's difficult to ascertain what caused the issues we experienced, but hopefully the devs are taking notes and working on them. We will say though that during our beta test on Steam, we generally experienced better quality of connection than we did in this early access period on PS5 with a wired Ethernet cable. Crossplay isn't something we're able to test for now, as the Steam version of the game doesn't have early access. And this ties directly into our next topic. Now there are several things worth considering. The standard edition of the game costs $49.99 US, while deluxe ups the price to $75 US. People are asking, is the game sufficiently different from the original GBVS? We'd say yes. Not only are you getting a title with improved gameplay and network, you're also getting an expanded roster that contains all the fighters previously sold separately. Many of the Granblue Fantasy players that are also considering purchasing the PS5 version of Rising because of the additional benefits they can get in the mobile game. But this is something that needs to be addressed. Steam players shouldn't be treated worse with all the benefits like GBF codes and early access only being there for PlayStation. It's understandable that companies are hesitant to do this on Steam because of the pretty lenient and no questions asked refund policy, but many of the superficial benefits could be tied to progression within the game, so an under 2-hour refund policy couldn't come into play. What is undoubtedly nice, however, is the existence of a relatively generous free version that will have 4 rotating characters available at any point, with most of the online modes readily available. It's not just a good place to start for those who can't afford the game at this point, but also a great add that could allow the players who are unsure to try it out. We had about a week to enjoy Granblue Fantasy Versus Rising before its release, and we immensely enjoyed our time with it. Characters feel nice, and new mechanics, while certainly powerful and potentially gameplay defining, feel well integrated. There are several features that would benefit from further improvements, and we surmise that super long distant matches are better avoided, rollback or not, but this game finally feels like a finished product. We think that questions like, is GBVSR good, or is it sufficiently different from the original, can be laid to rest. The only one that remains for us is, what makes the sky blue? Thank you so much for watching our review of Granblue Fantasy Versus Rising, and we'll see you in the next video.